Throughout history, few execution methods have been as gruesome, painful, and drawn out as being pulled apart by horses, also known as quartering by horses. This brutal punishment was once reserved for the most serious crimes, such as treason or regicide, and was designed not only to kill, but also to horrify. It turned death into a public spectacle, a warning to anyone who dared challenge royal authority. The act of being pulled apart by horses was not a quick or simple execution. It was an ordeal carefully staged for maximum suffering and public impact. The process differed slightly between countries and eras, but the overall goal remained the same: to literally tear the condemned man's body into pieces using the raw power of horses. Executions of this kind took place in open public squares, fields, or near city gates, where crowds could easily gather. The condemned man was usually stripped to his waist, so the crowds could witness every moment of his agony. Before the main act, the prisoner was often subjected to a confession, sometimes under torture, and then tied securely with ropes to ensure his limbs could be properly attached to the horses. In many cases, 4 horses were used, 1 for each limb. The executioner would tie strong ropes around the man's wrists and ankles, each connected to a different horse. These beasts were usually large and powerful, trained for pulling or cavalry work, capable of tremendous strength. The executioner and his assistants had to position them carefully so they faced away from each other, ensuring maximum tension when they began to move. When everything was ready, a signal was given, sometimes by a judge, a herald, or the head executioner. The horses would be urged forward, either by whips, shouts, or drumming. In some cases they started slowly, walking forwards until the ropes grew taut. The man's body would stretch unnaturally, joints popping, tendons snapping. Witnesses often reported screams that echoed across the square. If the horses were strong and pulled evenly, the victim's body might be torn apart quickly. However, this rarely happened. The human body is remarkably resilient. Often the horses could not separate the limbs without help. In these situations, executioners would take knives or axes and cut into the joints or tendons to weaken them. Once this was done, the horses pulled again, and finally, with enough force, the limbs would rip away from the torso. One of the first major recorded instances of this type of execution occurred in France. One of the most infamous cases was that of robber Francois Damiens in 1757. Damiens had attempted to assassinate King Louis XV, and his sentence was deliberately designed to be as horrifying as possible. Eyewitnesses recorded that it took several hours to complete the execution. The horses struggled to tear his limbs apart, and the executioners had to cut the flesh and sinew repeatedly before his body finally came apart. Execution by horse was meant to shock. They were performed before enormous crowds. Men, women, and even children gathered to witness what happened to those who defied the king or state. Pieces of the body were sometimes displayed afterwards. Arms, legs, and the torso hung on city gates or sent to different towns as warnings. The gruesome display wasn't limited to France. Similar types of execution occurred in England, Spain, Poland, and parts of Germany and Italy. In England, a comparable punishment existed, known as hanged, drawn, and quartered, which included disembowelment before the body was divided into parts, though horses were not always used for the tearing. By the late 18th century, public attitudes began to change. Enlightenment thinkers condemned such punishments as barbaric. The last known person to be executed by being pulled apart by a horse was Damiens in 1757. His death shocked even the French spectators, many of whom fainted or turned away. Soon after, the method was abolished across Europe. Governments realised that the horror of the act no longer served justice, but instead provoked disgust. Today, being pulled apart by horses stands as a grim reminder of how far human cruelty once went in the name of punishment, law, and power, a dark chapter in the long and bloody history of public execution. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.